Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Power to the Flower podcast. My name is Nairobi, and I'm your host. And this is episode 8. On this episode, we're going to be talking about maps and marijuana rescheduling. And not just any maps, we're going to talk about congressional maps and what the recent Supreme Court justices had decided on Louisiana versus Calais and the impacts to Black and Brown majority seats in Congress. How that plays into cannabis policy is what we're going to dive into here because if you hadn't realized, those who are advocating for the restoration for those who have been harmed by the war on drugs are folks like Cory Booker, who is a Black man representing New Jersey, and Representative Clyburn, who's from South Carolina, and also will be impacted by this Supreme Court justice decision. What we need to know here is not only that the interests of Black and Brown individuals may dwindle as a result of this Supreme Court decision, but also our voting power. So let's get into it on this episode. We're going to talk about Louisiana versus Calais, who Bert Calais is, and how this all correlates to non-Black individuals who are seeking to increase their voting power against the VRA, which is the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act gave Black people the right to vote. But let's take it back to 1965 real quick, because just last year we were celebrating 60 years of the anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, which was signed in, you guessed it, 1965. And this was actually signed into law by President Johnson, who, as you guys may remember, was coming off of the whole Jim Crow era, and Black folks in general in the United States were fighting for their civil rights alongside, obviously, some white allies as well. And people ultimately decided that we wanted to outlaw the Jim Crow laws because Black people needed a right to vote, and they still do. We still need representation across all racial party lines. But what the non-white voters, as they classified themselves in the Louisiana versus Calais Supreme Court case, they decided that they were the non-Black voters being discriminated against by these newly added seats and congressional maps that was ruled in favor of the Fifth Circuit District Court. These non-African American voters, as they called themselves, or non-Black voters, were the ones represented by the Calais side. So in the Louisiana versus Calais, it was the state of Louisiana versus Bob Calais, who is this guy who is a white man out in Louisiana, who also is a conservative, and said basically that the seats that were being added to the congressional map as a result of the 2020 census were going against the second section of the Voting Rights Act, which literally says you cannot discriminate based on race. What this did was it basically turned the Voting Rights Act on its head by the intention of which it was formed, which was to not discriminate and not keep Black people out. Well, the white folks also in Louisiana felt that the new maps, as a result of the 2020 census, which basically said that there were more Black people in Louisiana and there needs to be more representation, they were looking to literally sue the state of Louisiana. And so they did. In the Supreme Court decided 6-3 that they were ruling in favor with the non-African Americans, as they called themselves. The role that the census plays here is that every 10 years, we're going to come up one in 2030 as well. Every 10 years, we're taking a general census of who lives where. And whenever the census tract shows that there's a seat that needs to be filled or a new seat that was represented, it has to be reflected back onto the community in which it serves. Now, if there's an outstanding majority of Black folks, then that would create a Black seat. We now have complications because after this lawsuit and the Supreme Court ruling that this was a racially divided congressional seat, this ruling sets a precedent for any other seats that may be subject to this. So think about anywhere in Florida. Immediately after this ruling happened, the Florida Republicans started to redraw their district maps in the state and increase representation for Republicans and literally decrease representation for Black and Brown communities in Florida. So we know that Florida has not only Black folks, but it has Latinos as well, brown folks all around. But this is an issue because then we're decreasing our representation and some people may not even want to vote, also decreasing the power of voting as well. Some people don't even have faith in the system anymore. So this is overall a huge issue, something that needs to be addressed. Justice Alito, who was really in favor of this, saying that this is the newly updated framework of how we should see and interpret the VRA. And that's problematic because it literally goes against the purpose and why it was designed. And the rule of the Supreme Court is to interpret the Constitution. Constitutional interpretation would go by the justices at the Supreme Court, or even a justice or a judge who is ruling on the federal circuit levels. And here's why this is important to the cannabis policy rescheduling that just took place on the week of 420. Number one, as we see that the voting rights of individuals are being diluted, in particular Black and Brown individuals, we're going to see less desire to be involved in the democratic process. So if Black individuals and Brown individuals in the United States are less engaged in the process, they're not going to be advocating or talking to the representatives to advocate for better policies that directly impact their lives. More than likely, people will just give up on Congress and not even care about what's going on because they don't believe that they're being properly represented. And this, we've seen that happen before. And we want, obviously, for folks to just wake up to this reality. But the reality is the more diluted power that we have in voting, the less likely we're going to want to mobilize, unless we mobilize collectively as a unit against this decision. And so it leads us with these two things. We have to not only register to vote, but we actually have to vote and ensure that those that are being represented and their votes are being diluted in the states are actively engaged in the process. And this is especially going to be relevant in 2028 because now that these maps are subject to being redistricted and gerrymandered, we're going to see that folks are probably not going to even be included at all as much as they would have before. And even though that there's an increase in Black folks in a particular area in the South, they will not be represented by having someone that looks like them directly in the House or the Senate. And that, my friends, is a problem with regards to cannabis policy, because cannabis policy, when it is rescheduled, it doesn't necessarily do anything with regards to, let's say, those who were impacted by the war on drugs, which the majority are Black people. Okay. And any harms that needed to be repaired to our community would have been best focused and done something about by folks who represent us. And if we don't have them in Congress, chances are those represented issues are not going to be executed by those who do not look like us. And Republicans that would be represented in the House and the Senate in the United States Congress are going to look to do more things that are directly aligned with their agenda. And let me tell you, folks, they don't care about race. That's what they literally were saying with regards to this particular issue, that race should not be a factor, when in fact it is a factor when it comes back to how people have been policed over and over and over again. So this is why I say, folks, it's important not only to vote, but we have to stay involved and engaged in the process. And when things like this happen, we have to find ways to literally dissent as a public. Unfortunately, as the years are to come, I'm really concerned because none of these things will be prioritized. Cannabis policy as regards to housing, that is probably not going to occur. It's not going to be a priority for these Republicans who are majority white now going to enter into Congress come 2028. And also, let's talk about it. There is a presidential election that is upcoming, and what the new kind of America will look like and shape to be as we move forward in the next years to come. So tell me this, answer this for me. Is this a priority for you? Are you seeing the connections? And what would you like to do about it? It's difficult, you guys, because we're not seeing action being taken in Congress that would actually benefit the people overall. We're just seeing a lot of party lines being divided and people working towards their own interests and the interests of these big donors. And the reality is, if you're a regular average American, your interests, even if you're Black or brown or white or whatever, your interests may not be represented properly in Congress, because maybe the reality is we're just looking for cohesiveness. We're looking for a functioning government. And until we get that, I'm not sure that we have that government that we're looking to have. Until we have true representation, I'm not sure we could ever have a functioning Congress, or even better yet, a functioning Supreme Court, which, looking at how things have played out, dysfunction is all around in our U.S. government. So what are we going to do about it? Thank you so much for tuning in to the Power to the Flower podcast.